Hello to Gavin. Partridge, how are you today?
Hi, my friend. Hello, Ruben. Thank you so much for having me on your program today. I'm doing great, thank you.
Thank you for letting me interview you tonight. Can you tell me how long have you been a weather forecaster for?
That's no problem at all. You're very lucky. I don't do many interviews. The amount of interviews I've done since I've been doing Gaz Weathers in 2012 is probably about three, four. So I don't give interviews. So you're very, very lucky, my friend. No. So how long? Well, there are varying degrees of weather forecasting. So, I've actually been doing like literal forecast. About 2003 when I started. I posted the Weather Outlook forum was where I joined. Back in the day in the year 2000, actually, that was really, really long time ago. And on there, I started doing, so the very first thing that I did, the very first thing that started everything off was the week ahead forecast, actually, which is what I do on a Saturday. Still do that now, as a video and like a written thing. But it started on the Weather Outlook in 2003. So I had like 3 years on the forum and just as a general forum member. And then I started doing most little forecasts every Saturday on the Weather Outlook forum. And from that, it gradually built up. So I started doing a few more little forecasts here and there, And then in 2012, I started, well, it's New Year's Eve 2011, but I didn't do the first upload till 2012. I started a YouTube channel, which was just like a personal channel in my name, Gavin Partridge. And from that, it just gradually progressed. I started doing more videos. I wasn't sure whether I'd be able to do it because it's out of my comfort zone. I was, some people wouldn't know, but I was a very, very, very shy person. I am still quite shy, but of course I've come out of my box a lot, doing what I do. Come out of my shell a lot. And so I didn't know whether I'd be able to do it, and I wasn't very good when I started in 2012 doing these little videos on YouTube. But I must have had something, because I gradually started to improve a little bit and get a little bit better over time. And then I started a website, gazweathervids.com, which is an absolutely terrible name. If I were doing it now, I would call it something like the Weather View, with like a double meaning. But I was just messing about. I didn't know that it was going to become a job or a career. So I started gazweathervids.com, where I would embed the videos to, and do written forecasts and a blog and that kind of thing. And it just gradually developed. I mean, in 2014, I created a Gaz Weathers YouTube channel to go to. I have like the website and the YouTube channel together, because the original YouTube channel was Gavin Partridge. It was a personal channel, really. So that's how it developed. It just gradually, organically built up, So I never had a plan, but I mean, I do sort of 4 or 5 videos a day sometimes now. So it is a full-time job, really. But the amount of revenue that I get from like the live streams that I do, and the channel membership on the YouTube channel and all of that, it pays. It's not a huge amount of money, but it pays for me to be able to do that as a full-time sort of job. And it was never planned like that, and it's just the way that the thing developed over time. So I'm so lucky, so privileged to be able to do what I love, which is the weather, and I've loved that all my life. I'm able to do that as a job. I'm very, 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 very privileged and very lucky.
And what got you into the weather?
Well, I suppose I've got to give my age away now, haven't I? So I'm 45. So doing the math, that works out that I was born in 1977, which means that my younger childhood, the most informative years, coincides with like the early to middle 1980s. And in the early to middle 1980s, there was a run of very cold winters.
Cold weather, yeah.
So there was 1981, 82. There was 84, 85, 85, 86, 86, 87. You know, one after another of these freezing cold, snowy winters and that. And I would watch the weather. I mean, I can remember watching the weather in, there was a very cold December in 1981, a freezing cold, so December in 1981. I can remember, probably about 4 then, watching BBC weather forecast with my dad in the evening. My dad was a builder. He's passed away now. He passed in 2016. He owned his own building company, you know. So obviously weather is always important for what you're going to be able to do the next day if you're working outdoors and that. So he would watch the weather in the evening, and I would watch it with him to see whether it was going to snow. So that's one of the earliest memories I have, you know, of me and my dad actually watching weather together, which is very sweet, you know, very nice memory. And I think that's where it started, you know, with those very cold winters. But of course, the thing with that was I got a false impression of what the British weather is, you know. So when after the cold winters, there was a run of 3 exceptionally mild winters. So it was 87, 88, 88, 89, 89, 90. And I can tell you about the first one of those brought me down to earth with a crash. And you know, I realized then, oh well, actually British weather isn't typically very cold and snowy winter after winter. And actually what we had gone through in that period, which sort of actually started at the end of the 1970s, but it was almost like 10 years of unusually cold winters from about 76, 77 to 86, 87. Actually, it was an abnormal period, really, for our climate. You know, it was a deviation. The winters that we then got to at the end of the 1980s were actually more typical. But despite that, the love remained, you know, the love for the weather remained. I've got the bug by then. So that's where it started. And I just gradually learned more. You know, I used to watch BBC weather forecasts. They used to do, I don't know if they still do it, but they used to do a 5-minute forecast called Weather View every night. On BBC Two at 5 to midnight. It would be later at weekends, but it was normally 5 to midnight. And as I got a little bit older, so as I got into my teens, then I was able to stay up later on my little portable black and white telly with you know, with the aerial, but you had to swivel around to try and get a reception and that. So I started watching that, and that will go in depth. Of course, with BBC forecast, then they always show synoptic charts anyway. So they don't do as much now. But even like on the shorter forecast, 6:30 or whatever, they would still show the synoptic weather maps and that then. So, but the weather view that they did every night at 5 to midnight on BBC, that went in depth into things. So that's where I started learning more. And then, of course, in 2000, the internet revolution came along. By then, I was sort of 22, 23. And I was ready, you know, to really start soaking up the knowledge, because everybody can do weather forecast, but everything's online, you know, all the charts, the information, the data, it's all out there online. It has been since the dawn of the internet. But it's a way that you interpret, you know, you've got to interpret the charts and the data. So it's been a gradual progression, but it's like I started with the bug, you know, I got the bug when I was about 3-4 years old. So it's been a lifelong passion and love.
Yeah, because I think me and you are the same age. Because in your birthday in March.
No, October. 17th of October, so 1977.
Yes. Yeah, I'm 77 in March.
Oh right, okay, you're a little bit older than me.
Yeah, then. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. If we was at school together, you would have been in the year above me, wouldn't you? You know, you'd been in the year above.
Yeah, because I remember the 80s in Cornwall, because we had snow and they had icicles actually inside. That's how cold it was. I remember it very well.
There was some brutal cold winters in the 1980s, you know. But it was an exception. We went through like a similar run but not quite to, well, say not quite to the same severity, but actually December 2010 was more severe than anything that occurred in the 1980s, actually. But we went for a similar run from 2008, 9 to 2012, 2013, you know. And at that point, it'd been so long since we'd had a run of very cold winters. I was wondering whether it was possible, you know, whether it could still happen. But it proved that from 08, 09 to 12, 13, it proved, you know, that it was then still possible. So we wait now, you know, we wait to see if and when we get another run of very cold, you know, winters that are a deviation and you know, are not the norm, are not typical, but they do tend to come in clusters like that. It's quite interesting. Another run would be in the 1960s, you know. 1960s had a lot of cold winters, which the climax of that climax. What am I doing? Calm yourself down, Gav. Calm yourself. No, the climax of that in the 60s was the daddy of cold winters, of course, 62, 63. But yeah, it is interesting. You know, it's very interesting. But a cat can't really come in. Oh, it's gone. Okay, it is interesting that how we get these runs of colder winters that are a deviation to the norm.
Same as the winds. Is it the bad winds? Was it 19 in the 90s?
Oh, well, there are a few storms, weren't there? So there was 87, there was the 87 storm, the Michael Fish thing. Yes. Although, you know, he made, I think Sir Michael, I call him, because he should have had a knighthood, really, because he did so much, you know, so much for meteorology and weather. So I call him Sir Michael. I think Sir Michael Fish, you know, despite the embarrassment at the time of that, you know, I think he made a pretty good life for himself out of that, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I think he did all right. He did all right from it, and he was technically right. It wasn't a hurricane. You know, we had hurricane force winds, but it wasn't a hurricane because we can't get hurricanes because we're not a tropical or subtropical climate. So it was technically correct, but it was a bad forecast, you know. But then these things happen. So there was that one, 1987. There was another big one. Indoor fans, we wasn't too bad in 87, actually. Just to give a glancing break, Silverstone, you know, where the racing is, and Coast, right in the very south of the county, they got it a bit rough down there, but basically gave Northampton a glancing blow. So we was all right in 87. But we had another really big storm in 1990, which was the Burns night storm. So that would have been January 1990, and that was really bad here. Actually, that's much worse than the 87 storm. So there was that one. And yeah, there were quite a few in the 1990s. The 1990s, you know, was a much warmer decade for winters. And typically, if it's warmer, you know, it's going to be wetter and it's going to be windier. So when it's cold, it will tend to be cold and dry. I'm generalizing now, of course. There are always exceptions to the rule. Like December 2010 was cold and wet, you know, cold and very snowy, but that was an exception. Generally, if it's cold, it's quite dry. And if it's mild, it's quite wet. So in the 1990s, we had quite a lot of mild winters. There were a few colder ones in as well, but generally it was a decade of mild winters. And many of those winters were wet and windy and stormy. So there were lots of storms in the 1990s. Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it, how the weather goes in these blocks. You know, warm and wet winters might last for a decade, with one or two exceptions. You know, then you might get a run of 4 or 5 very cold winters, but a lot drier and less stormier. But of course, that is the deviation. The warmer, wetter winters, they are the, you know, that's the British climate are prevailing west-south westerlies. So they will always come back, you know, however long the run of the colder winters goes on, for eventually you'll go back to the milder winters. I got a love and hate relationship with thunder and lightning.
So
right, okay.
I quite like the lightning, but I hate the thunder. So why is it so hard to predict?
Thunderstorms.
Yeah.
I actually do. There are two things that are very difficult to predict, I find. The two hardest elements. One is snow, because most of the time, unless it's really cold, most of the time snow will be marginal. So it will be like rain, sleet, turning to snow, or it will be snow, then turn to sleet and rain. So that's always quite difficult to forecast for. And the other one that's quite difficult is thunderstorms. That is actually the one that I struggle with the most, to be honest. I'm not sure why it is, why that is for our country, but thunderstorms seem to be very difficult to predict. But generally, we can get, like the huge supercell thunderstorms that you will find in America or in Europe when the weather breaks there. So those supercell thunderstorms, they can stretch over hundreds of miles. Generally, our thunderstorms tend to be much smaller and much more localized. Again, I'm generalizing with this, of course, but generally the storms in our country tend to be a lot smaller, a lot more localized. And with that, the various is topography. Is that a word? Topography. The outline of where somebody's living. For instance, where I'm in a village called Longbuckby in Northamptonshire. I don't mind giving my location away because everybody knows where I am, hence the takeaway. But I had to live unexpectedly on my live stream a couple of years ago. But where I live, it's almost like in a valley. The village is kind of like in a valley. And very often you'll be able to see the storms going around the edge of that. So we often miss the thunderstorms. They'll kind of go round the valley and then off from that. So they'll go from like Daventry to Rugby in a diagonally, and so go round my village. And there's a lot of that, there's a lot of that goes on with these smaller localized storms. Because if you've got a supercell that's stretching over hundreds of miles, then everybody is going to get it. But we tend to have our storms that are a lot smaller, a lot more localized, a lot more regional, and that creates a much more significant level of difficulty, to be able to predict where those storms are going to occur. But yeah, it's all part of the fun of trying to do forecasting. But I tend to do better with snow. I've got my little rule of thumb for snow to work out where's like get rain, where's like get snow. Normally, the calculation works with the upper air temperatures and the dew points, etc., etc., etc. Normally, the calculation works all right. So I do better with snow than I do with thunderstorms.
I guess all the elements have got to be there for it to happen.
Yeah, you've got to have the storms. You've got to have a reasonable amount of the convective potential, but you don't want it too over the top. Got to have some humidity. And where we often fall down in this country, I've found over the years, is like to get a trigger. So you can have as much, we call it cape and lifted. You can have as much convective potential in actually as you want. You can have huge levels of cape sometimes. But if you've not got a trigger to trigger the storm, which would normally be like a weather front or a convergence line or some feature, then that's where we tend to fall down a little bit in this country, and those triggers I've found over the last few years that like the southeast tends to do a little bit worse. The thunderstorms, like London, East Anglia. So those triggers I think they tend to be a little bit further north and west than they used to be as well. So it tends to be more northern and west areas that seem to get the trigger for the storms, where the southeast, often you'll just get, like last year when we got to 40 degrees, you will think, because it was in the east where we had the exceptional heat. It was very hot everywhere, but it was like that 40-degree temperature will stretch at the A1 I think. And so you will think that where it's hottest, would be where the storms would then occur, but actually the storms occurred to the northwest. And what happened for the east and southeast was just like a cold front came through, but it was so weak, but it just brought like a push of cloud, and the wind picked up a little bit in the evening as well. And just pushed through very, very nonchalantly and didn't really do very much. And we've had a lot of that over the last few summers, which I think is quite a significant change actually to the summers that I remember back in the 90s and the 80s, where even if it wouldn't get that hot, we wouldn't get to 40 degrees in the 1980s summers. So you get temperature perhaps about 30. Back in the 1980s, if we got a temperature of 30 degrees, it was quite a significant thing to get to 30 degrees in the 1980s summer. But the thunderstorms were better, surprisingly, for the east and for the south anyway. The thunderstorms seemed to be more widespread, more severe, better storms back then. So there have been quite significant changes, actually, I think, with wave thunderstorms to work out. The other thing that I think as well, with the modern summers, where we get these very intense heat spikes, so we haven't had one yet for this summer, but like last summer, for example, I think the air is coming from further south now, so that's why it gets so extreme with the temperature. So we used to call these sort of what we call heat spikes now are basically Spanish plumes, but they're Spanish plumes on steroids. So back in the 80s and 90s, these Spanish plumes would have the air originating from Spain, but hence the Spanish plume. Now the air is originating from Africa. It's originating from the Sahara. It's originating from those areas, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, North Africa. And I think with that, the air is drier as well. I think there's a drier element to the air, which means that it perhaps isn't quite as humid as it would have been in a classic, typical Spanish plume sort of 20, 30 years ago. But so not quite humid, but it's more, the heat is more intense, the air's drier, and that means that there's less humidity, less moisture, less availability for thunderstorms, and particularly so for the south and the southeast, for London, for East Anglia. That's my, I don't know, but that's my suspicion about what's been happening the last few summers.
So can you tell me more about how is it hard to predict the snow?
Can you say that again, please, Rueben?
How hard is it to predict the snow?
Snow is difficult, but I find it easier than thunderstorms. But there is a uncertainty with snow. We don't, and a lot of that is due to how unusual it's become. It's nowhere near as frequent and common to get snow in the winters now as it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, back in the 1980s, let's say. No, the modelling doesn't deal with it tremendously well, because I don't think it's an element that the modelling is used to seeing, so that creates an element of uncertainty. But generally, the parameters for snow still work. So if you've got the right upper air temperature, you've got the right dew point, generally it's relatively easy to work out where it's likely to snow and where it's likely to rain. And of course, if we get very cold weather, and with that I'll be thinking about the beach in the east, for example, in 2018, then it's no problem at all, because the air is so cold that any precipitation that falls out of the sky is just going to be snow or drupal or whatever. No, so that's easier, it gets very cold. Of course, we don't get it extremely cold that often. Generally, in this country, the snow will be more of a marginal scenario. So you've got to look at things like height as well. That makes quite a significant difference with more marginal snow, how far above sea level are places. But generally the dew point, upper air temperature, combined works pretty well for me, and I normally do all right with snow.
So tell me more about the jet stream. That's a lot to do with weather, isn't it?
Yeah, fast ribbon moving, fast ribbon of air, high up in the atmosphere. Yeah, the jet stream is interesting because, of course, in the northern hemisphere, the jet stream will go from west to east, and where we are in our part of the world, we're very impacted by the jet stream. So some places are impacted more by the jet stream than others. So, for example, if you're in Eastern Europe or Southern America, you will be less impacted by the jet stream than areas further north. And of course, coastal regions are going to be impacted more by the jet stream because the jet stream will pick up energy as it comes across the ocean. So anywhere that's like downstream of a jet stream near an ocean, so for that, you'll be talking about the northwestern coast of America, you'll be talking about the northwestern coast of Europe, anywhere that's like head on, face on to a jet stream is going to be impacted by it. And that's the position that we find ourselves in. So what I was talking about earlier on, with the cold winters that we had in the 1980s being the exception to the rule, the reason for that, or a lot of the reason for that, there's two reasons for that. So one reason for that is what we call the Gulf Stream, which is a current of very warm water in the North Atlantic that runs up the east coast of America and then moves out into the North Atlantic and eventually finishes up like in the Norwegian Sea and Svalbard and that sort of area. So it ends up. But we're impacted by that. That runs like to the southwest of our country and up the western side. We're impacted by the Gulf Stream. And the other factor is the jet stream. We have both of those elements combined. And that's the reason that what I said about the cold winters that we had in the 80s being an exception to the rule, and actually the mild winter at the end of the 80s being more typical. The reason for that is the jet stream combined with the Gulf Stream. So the jet stream is always a very important factor. But when we go through those colder winters, you will find that the jet stream becomes more wavy. So the jet stream, so normally the jet stream is flat and goes from west to east, of course, and goes in quite a straight run. But you can get kinks and bends in the jet stream, what we call meridionality. I hope I'm not boring people with all of this, but you can get meridionality to the jet stream, where instead of going straight, it does something a little bit like that. So we call those where the jet stream rises up, we call that a ridge, and where the jet stream dips, we call that a trough. So if you find yourself under a trough, which is typically what will happen when we have a cold winter, we'll be stuck under a cold trough with a blocking ridge, probably somewhere near Greenland. Then that's when we get the colder weather in this country. And the same is true in summer. So this summer at the moment, the early part of the summer, we started off under a ridge, with a very weakened jet stream. The jet stream has invigorated a little bit as we've gone into this July. The ridges tended to go to the Greenland area. We have got some northern blocking this July, and we found ourselves under a trough, over northern and west here, and so that's the reason that the pattern changed from June to July. We found ourselves under low pressure and cool, unsettled weather. Of course, with that though, the hot air from Africa is still there across southern Europe, though. So that's the reason at the moment they're getting very, very hot conditions down in the Mediterranean across southern Europe, because the heat wants to go north, the heat wants to expand out, across the continent, really. And ultimately, warmth and heat is trying to go from the south to the north in the northern hemisphere. So any way of transporting that, and another great example of that is hurricanes. What hurricanes are doing fundamentally at their core is they're trying to transport heat from the tropic to the polar region. It's one of the cooling mechanisms of the planet, basically, a hurricane. So at the moment, the heat is kind of stuck across southern Europe. The jet stream and this trough that we've found ourselves under across northern and Western Europe, that is not allowing the heat to expand out, from southern Europe. So that's the reason that they're so extremely hot at the moment across the south. If and when the jet stream and the trough shifts and moves, then that heat will be able to start going northwards, expanding out across the continent. And southern Europe, while still hot, of course, because it is summer, so it is going to be hot in Italy and Spain and etc., Algeria, those areas. Corsica, Sardinia, those areas, Malta, everything so very, very hot. It will still be hot, but it won't be as hot. The heat will relent, if it is able to go northwards.
Can you tell me where can people find you on social media?
Well, I've got the Gaz Weathervitz YouTube channels I spoke about at the start. So just go to YouTube in the search engine and put in Gaz Weathervids or Gavin Partridge Weather, as I appreciate Gaz Weathervids is a little bit of typing. So it's easier, just put Gavin Partridge Weather or Gaz Weathervids into the YouTube search engine and my channel will appear. We're at 60 subscribers. We've got another 40 to get to 16.5k. We're also on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, although I don't do all that much with Instagram really, but yeah, we're across all of the social. Well, it's not Twitter now, it's X, isn't it? Elon has rebranded. So, but if you go to X, formerly known as Twitter, and look for Gaz Weathervids, then we're there. We've got over 17,000 subscribers there. We're on Facebook. So yeah, we're across the socials.
Thank you for letting me chat to you this evening. I'm going to play 5-star called Rain or Shine. So thank you for chatting to me tonight, Gavin Partridge.
Thank you so much, Ruben. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much. Have a great day, my friend. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Same to you. Enjoy the rest of your
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye, everybody.
Goodbye, Gavin. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.